Have you ever prayed, like really prayed, and then looked up and nothing had changed? The bill was still there. The door was still closed. The silence was still loud. And you wondered if anyone was actually listening. I need you to stay in that feeling for just a moment. Don't rush past it, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about a prayer that was answered quickly. It is not a story about a man who prayed and the skies opened and everything turned gold. It is a story about a man who prayed and heard nothing, and what happened in that nothing. Because sometimes the silence is not emptiness. His name was Daniel Mercer, 41 years old, and by every measure the world uses to keep score, he had lost. 3 years earlier, Daniel had built a small carpentry business from nothing, from $200, a borrowed truck, and hands that knew wood the way a musician knows sound. He had a workshop in Burlington, Vermont. He had a daughter named Ellie who called every Sunday. He had a name that meant something on Maple Street. Then his business partners stole everything. Accounts emptied, contracts canceled, the workshop padlocked by a bank that did not care about Sunday phone calls. Daniel moved into a room above a laundromat. He took a job sweeping floors at a hardware store, the same store where 3 years before he had bought tools with confidence, telling the cashier, "I'll be back for the bigger ones soon." He went back. He swept around them. Every morning he woke up and told himself, tomorrow will be different. And tomorrow kept arriving looking exactly like today. On the coldest night of February, -19, ice forming on the inside of windows, Daniel's car broke down on the Winooski Bridge, a narrow crossing above a frozen river, 11 miles from town, no phone signal, no passing cars. He sat in that dead car for 40 minutes. The heater ticked once, twice, then went silent. Cold moved through the doors like something with intention. And that was it. That was the moment. Not the stolen business, not the laundromat room, not the broom in the hardware store. It was this, a dead engine on a dark bridge that finally reached the bottom of him. He thought about Ellie. He thought about the workshop. He thought about every version of his life that had not happened. And then he did something he had not done in 3 years. He bowed his head against the steering wheel and he asked, not out loud, because a man alone in the cold sometimes runs out of voice. He simply, quietly asked for help. Nothing happened. The wind pressed harder. The river below was silent and white. A truck pulled up. An old green Ford, the kind you don't see anymore. An elderly man climbed out wearing a wool cap, moving slowly, but with the certainty of someone who had been cold before and was not afraid of it. The old man nodded like this was ordinary. He pulled cables from behind his seat, connected the batteries, said nothing while the engine coughed back to life. Then he handed Daniel a thermos of coffee, real coffee, and he said something Daniel would never forget. "Son, I drive this bridge every Tuesday night to check the road conditions for the county. I haven't missed a Tuesday in 6 years. Tonight, I almost stayed home. Something told me not to." He drove away before Daniel could get his name. The morning after. Daniel drove home slowly. He did not sleep. He sat at the small table in his room above the laundromat, holding that thermos, sitting with the feeling that he had been, in some way he could not fully name, seen. The next morning, he walked into the hardware store, not to sweep. He walked to the manager's office and asked if they needed someone to run their custom-build workshop. The manager looked at him for a long moment. "We've needed someone for 8 months," he said. "I just kept putting off the ad." Within a year, Daniel had rebuilt, something better, something with integrity. Ellie visited that summer and ran her hands along the wood of his new workshop, the way children touch things they want to remember. Now, Do you remember that moment I asked you to hold at the beginning? Your last straw? I want you to look at it differently today. Your lowest point is not a punishment. It is the exact location where you are close enough to the ground to finally be still. And stillness sometimes is the only posture from which rescue can find you. The old man on that bridge was not magic. He was a county worker in a wool hat, but he was placed. He was moved to go when his comfort said stay. That is how provision usually arrives, not as lightning, not as a miracle that breaks the laws of nature, but as an ordinary person doing an ordinary thing at exactly the right moment. When the ice swallows your last road, God is already building you a new one. Your last straw is not the end of your story. It is the last thing that had to fall before you were finally empty enough to be filled. Your job, when you are frozen, when the engine is dead, when the river below you is white and silent, is simply to stay in the car, stay present, and if you have any voice left at all, use it. Because someone is already driving the bridge. They almost stayed home tonight. Something told them not to. Sometimes the silence is movement you can't see yet.